Pete's probably been up here more times than I have, but a little bit about his background. Peter is a process engineer with over 30 years corporate experience. He doesn't look that old, but in the minerals industry, specializing in financing, marketing, business development, and general corporate activities. Prior to joining Poseidon in March 2020, Peter was managing director of Panoramic Resources for 18 years, and I think that's where we saw him up here many times. Steering it through the financing and development of the Savannah Nickel Project, which we'll hear from as well, in East Kimberley, and acquisition and restart of the Lanfranchi Nickel Project near Kambalda. Peter is also chairman of ASX-listed Rare Foods Australia Limited, and has been on a number of other ASX-listed company boards over the last 15 years. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that very warm welcome. So look, Poseidon's story, it's one of, it's been around for a long time. Some of your parents or grandparents probably made or lost money in 1969 in the last Poseidon boom. And most of you will know the shares went to $280. I got a call the other day from a lovely old bloke in Adelaide who said, I've got these shares called Poseidon NL. I've got the certificate here, is it worth any money? I said, well, that's actually the same, one of the same assets, but a different company. I can't really help you there. But he actually sent me the certificates, and we're going to put them up in the boardroom. So 1969, half-page shares or something like that in pounds. The disclaimer, there's a typo on line 7, but you probably missed that. The old days. So look, I'm a bit of a car nut, and God, I would love to own one of these. All made out of stainless steel, and these were done by the manufacturers as a bit of a gimmick. And they sold recently, I think, for about $1 million each, but all made out of stainless steel. When I joined the nickel business 30 years ago, working for Australian Consolidated Minerals, we owned Mount Keith before Western Mining picked it up through a takeover. Nickel was about 1 million tonnes a year of primary nickel being produced in the world, made by the Canadians, the Russians, the Australians, and there was a bit of material produced out of Indonesia and the Philippines, but very small. And pretty much 70% of that nickel went into making stainless steel. And that was the future of nickel that I could see anyway. And that's only sort of 30 years ago that I started in nickel. Now you've got this revolution with electric cars, and that Hummer looks pretty attractive, and I wouldn't mind one of those, probably bloody expensive, but you know, it's just amazing now that you've got all the car manufacturers are going to electric, and 2035 General Motors won't produce any petrol cars. A lot of other companies are going even sooner than that, Jaguar, BMW. I mean, most of the European car manufacturers, Volkswagen, are going much earlier than that. So we are in the middle of a revolution. Also, what's interesting, and I only picked this up the other day, was if you look at the average battery in a car, which is a 60 kilowatt battery, or battery pack, it actually contains mostly graphite, a little bit of aluminium, quite a lot of nickel, nearly 30 kilograms, quite a bit of copper, a lot of manganese, cobalt. Lithium is right down the bottom. And so I'm sort of wondering, why is it a lithium-ion battery? Why is it not a nickel-ion battery? But I'm a chemist, and so I know you can't call them one of those. But yeah, there's a lot more nickel in those batteries than I think most investors think. Here's the demand for the next 10 or 15 years. So by 2030, you can see the non-batteries growing at a compound rate of about 5%, and that's been the stainless steel production since 1970. It's been growing at about 5% per annum, and the average grade of stainless has got about 8% of nickel in it. But you can just see how batteries are going to take off, and by 2030, that growth is going to go from 50,000 tonnes of nickel in batteries for the second half of 22 to 1.7 million tonnes of nickel. It's an incredible amount of nickel. And then I just did some sums and looked at, this is a Glencore slide from a couple of years ago, and this is all the base metals. And if you look at the numbers that they're going to grow, so I started in nickel, as I said, 30 years ago, and the primary nickel production was about 1 million tonnes a year of nickel sulfide, or nickel going into a cathode mostly. It's about 2.5 million tonnes today, and by 2050, over 9 million tonnes. So it's the largest increase of all of those, with the exception of cobalt. And obviously we know that the nickel and the cobalt's really important for the electric vehicle. Incredible growth numbers. And so, you know, why is it that number? Well, look, if you look at the number of motor cars on the road, this is a staggering number, 1.45 billion cars on the road. Today, most of them are powered by diesel or petrol. If you worked out 29 kilograms, and if you shifted every one of those motor cars over to a 60 kilowatt battery, you need 42 million tonnes of nickel. I mean, it's just a staggering number. And this year we're going to produce about 3 million tonnes of primary nickel. So we need a lot more nickel. And if you look at all those, that balloon chart there, you can see there's actually not that many projects. And I think Alex pointed out that what's going to happen is the mines are going to get lower grade. And, you know, some of the numbers that people are talking about now in some of these projects, I would have called it mineralised waste years ago. It would have mined it and put it on the stockpile. Now these projects are all going to be mines. And there's a huge amount of capital that's in the market that's sloshing around, and it's going to finance these projects. There's government money. You know, I've never seen in my career the amount of money that's been dished out by the federal government. $120 million for our partners in the project in Kalgoorlie for the refinery. I mean, these are big numbers. And you've got NAIF, you've got state government money, you've got all the private equity groups, you've got the traditional share market, and then you've got all the banks. And so already you've seen Oz Minerals come out with their feasibility study, and straight off the bat of that, they had a $1.2 billion financing package lined up with just a group of banks, incredible amount of money. And we're going to need to see a lot of that come into the market. So how are we going to benefit from that? Well, we've got a lot of projects that have been around for a long time, including that project I mentioned, Mount Windara, which was the original Poseidon. It's not the same company. It's obviously was Niagara, then it became Poseidon. We've also got Black Swan, which I worked on back in 1995 when MPI discovered it, and then Lake Johnson. So we've got 3 previous operations. We've got 2 processing plants that combined can do nearly 4 million tonnes. And we've also got the old Windara asset, which doesn't have a processing plant, but does have a reasonable sized ore body. So we're, unlike Alex and Brad, which are fantastic, you know, virgin discoveries, we're going to go back to where mines were in the past. And historically, one good place to look for new ore bodies is where you found old ones. And we had great success when I was at Panoramic with Lanfranchi. I remember John Hicks driving up saying, "Pete, I don't know why we bought this thing, this is a disaster." And 2 years later, we found one of the biggest ore bodies, 300 metres away from where Western Mining had been operating for 30 years, was 62,000 tonnes of nickel at Deakin. So a good place to look is where nickel has already been mined, and so that's what we're going to have a decent crack at. But we're also going to get back into production again too. That's a shot of the mill at Black Swan, or mills. You've got a SAG mill or a ball mill there that can combine do about 2.2 million tonnes. People forget that there's nearly about 180,000 tonnes of nickel pulled out of Black Swan and Silver Swan. But we've got over 200,000 tonnes of nickel in resource there, a combination of open pit and underground, and a little bit of tailings as well. And our focus there is to fill the mill. How can we get those mills going again and punch out a lot more nickel? We've got 2 options there. One is a smelter grade con, and the other one is a rougher con that would really suit the processing through POX or HPAL. The open pit there you can see is only about 150 metres down. We're currently dewatering that. That'll be cleaned out by about the end of November. We've got the Silver Swan decline there that goes right down to the bottom there where the red, which is about 12,000 tonnes of 9% nickel, that's opened all the way to the bottom. We've scaled it all. We've done a lot of rehab. All the ladder ways have been replaced. We've spent millions of dollars getting that ready. We also had success recently with Golden Swan. We've got a new ore body down there. I think we were all hoping it to be a little bit bigger, but it's still 6,000 tonnes of 4% nickel, which will definitely be mined at some point in time in the future. But it's also opened up this big area called the Southern Terrace, which we really haven't done much work on yet. So you can see that area in the yellow below the pit. Certainly an area that we'd like to explore a lot more going forward. So talking about the 2 options here, the benefit that we've got is the mills there. We can refurbish those. I mean, replacement cost on a 2.5 million tonne processing facility today would be, I don't know, $250 million. And we can refurbish it for a fraction of that. And also time, it's all permitted and it can be basically restarted just after that refurb's done. If we go the smelter option, it's about a 1 million tonne case, which is just the SAG mill, and we basically put the serpentinite ore through that. Gives us about 5 years, and we can produce a very saleable nickel concentrate traditional smelting route. If we refurbish the ball mill as well, we've got 2.2 million tonnes of capacity, and we can treat not only the serpentinite but also the higher talc carbonate material. There's also got nickel in it, but was previously stockpiled by Norilsk, the previous owners, and that would be produce what we call a rougher concentrate, 5 to 6, 7% nickel, but it's got high MgO, so that wouldn't go through a traditional smelter. So certainly someone like BHP Nickel West wouldn't want to take that material, but it would certainly suit a POX plant, pressure oxidation, or an HPAL plant. So we've got an MOU with Pure Battery, and they're looking at building this processing plant in Kalgoorlie to treat these types of materials. Their stage 1 is 50,000 tonnes of PCAM, which is 25,000 tonnes of nickel. So if we got stage 2, the 2.2 million tonne project going, we would probably be almost the base load for that refinery. So that's quite exciting. That refinery could also take the smelter feed as well, of which there's a lot of interest from people from in this room, including people like Yiman, who represents Jingshuan, who we've shipped material to previously. Very busy slide, but what I did want to mention was the breakthrough that we made and just announced a couple of days ago, which was Dave Maxton, who's our metallurgical, he's our project director, he's also a metallurgist, and he really has been sort of pushing this very hard. And what he's done is he's realised that if we use the old mill, which is another mill we've got there, not we have to buy it, so the little blue mill or the green mill you can see, there's the old Silver Swan mill, which we built when I was involved in the project in '97. That's a 150,000 tonne a year mill, which was processing the Silver Swan material. We can repurpose that as a rougher, to regrind the rougher con. We can get a much higher concentrate grade, up to about 17%, and we can get the iron MgO ratio well above 5 to 1. So that makes it a very attractive material for the smelters, and it should be able to get very high payabilities. And when I started in the business and we developed this project back in '97, we were getting paid less than about 60% payability for the nickel. That's now gone up to the high 70s, into the 80s. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of how valuable all that material would be. We've also got, so we hope we can get good terms for both the smelter grade material, but also the rougher material as well. We've got a much better understanding of the ore types. We've got the costs in, and they're obviously much, much less for refurbishing than a brand new plant, and also a much truncated time zone. And we should have that feasibility study finished on the 1.1 million tonne case around about the time of the AGM, sort of second half of November. And the second one will be into next year, because there's a bit more drilling and a little bit more metallurgical test work to do. But quite exciting. So I've got 3 minutes to talk about the rest of the projects that we've got. Black Swan is the one that we'll start first, and then we've got the other projects. So Lake Johnson, been around for a long time, an ex-Lion ore project, and then obviously Lion, Norilsk took that over. Still, big numbers, 100,000 tonnes of nickel in concentrate produced over about a 10-year period. And there's still 50,000 tonnes of 1.5% nickel in Maggie Hayes in the area below where they mined. Big processing plant, 1.5 million tonnes. We had GRs do a bit of scoping study work on it a few months ago, came up with a refurb number, $30 million. Well, that will have escalated a little bit, but again, replacement on that, $200 million, and how many years to get it permitted and built. We've also got some wonderful exploration opportunities here as well, and we've obviously been using New Exco, who I refer to as the nickel whisperers. If there's any nickel out there, they'll certainly help us find it. And it's good to see some of their reps in the room today. They've done a very, very detailed review of all of the targets, and you can see there's targets all the way along the trend. And the one that they've identified that we're going to look at first is the what we call the Western Ultramafic. And we've actually already got a project that can be permitted to actually drill that. It's about 15,000 metres of drilling, and we'll start that early next year. We've got a camp there, as everyone knows, and we're actually helping a lot of people in the area explore for lithium, and they're using our facilities there. And then last but by no means least, there's Windara, discovered back in '69, mined for about 10 years, and then they switched over to gold, and they mined some gold. So we've still got about 150,000 tonnes of nickel in 2.5 resources there, Mount Windara and Cerberus, and then there's also a bit of material below the old open pit. There's also a tailings, 180,000 ounces of tailings, which we've just done a deal with Green Gold, who are sort of tailings experts. They're doing some test work to see if their proprietary technology works. So we could actually end up with about an 8% free carry. So that's great. So we can focus all of our attention on the nickel. And the one option that we do have, and we think is a really interesting one, is actually mining ore from Mount Windara first, and then potentially Cerberus, taking it to surface, putting it through a crusher and an ore sorter, and then trucking it down to Black Swan. It's about 350 kilometres, and that could go through as a relatively high-grade material through the plant. And again, we've got plenty of milling capacity there. So why invest in Poseidon? Well, we're a near-term producer. We sit, after Panoramic, which is going again now and ramping up, Mincor, which is ramping up, we're the next kids on the block. And we're by no means kids, we're almost the older statesmen, certainly is what Dan said. We've been around for a while, and we've got the ability to get into production. From the time that we press the button on the project, we could be in production within 12 months. That's the full refurb and ramping up to production. So we're a near-term producer. The next one after us of any size is probably West Musgrave, which I think is, at least 3 years away, so maybe 4. So, we are a near-term producer. We've got a great management team and board they've got experience in developing these types of projects and financing them, and we've got all that infrastructure already in place. So I think we really are well placed to take advantage of this amazing nickel cycle. And we've even got blokes like Biden now saying, they want to mine more nickel. What I didn't realise is the states only produce about 1% of the global nickel production, or less than 0.5%. So they're even doing all of these, what do they call it, the Defence Production Act, that is trying to get more nickel produced in the US. So look, everybody wants more nickel, and we're going to be playing a real part in that nickel production going forward. Thank you.